Welcome back, Scott. I see you have a nice
Good
background.
morning. Yeah, out of country this week, traveling for the Arnolds to see all the bikini competitors.
Oh,
Yeah,
Uh,
in their glory.
so this week I want to talk about approaching the spring, summer slash summer season, and how do you set yourself up for the better, greater success? Because Christmas time, Thanksgiving, you name it, all these festivities are in between last summer and coming summer. And you want it or not, you're gonna get a little bit, so to speak, lazier or a little bit out of shape. Definitely affected by seasonal change as well, less sun and so on, so forth. Don't we just don't have any much near as activity as we would wish to keep in shape. So, what are the foundations to setting up goals to get somebody in the best possible position for a spring, for summer, where they don't need to be nervous about trying to play catch up about like, hey, I'm still not in shape and I'm only going to eat salad through the week so I can enjoy a cake in a weekend or and things like that. What do you see?
What we see in general in the fitness industry, and what I absolutely see myself, typically is people coming around now, right? March, maybe even April. Hey, summer's coming. I want to look this way, and now you're already on a very, very tight timeline, and most people aren't in a position from a body composition point of view to have the physique they're looking to have by summer when they start in the middle of spring. And that's the unfortunate reality that most people approach because you typically just see very well marketed, gimmicky bullshit approaches like 30-day challenges or 60-day challenges or all these extreme sort of boot camp style I can drop 30 pounds in 60 days kind of advertisements. So people see that and they think that that timeline applies to them no matter what. So, oh, no big deal. I still have a few more weeks. I can just do whatever, and then I'm going to hit it hard. And unfortunately, that's just an approach that is not only not sustainable, but they're causing all kinds of problems long term. And each time they do this every year, it gets harder and harder and harder, and they don't get the same results each time. So they slowly get further and further away from the end goal and drive their bodies further and further into the ground to try to correct the problem.
So, how do you assess the timeline needed to be at your best shape in a summer? Let's say middle of May for a majority of time.
Um, I measure people's body compositions like we've talked about before. I can tell you that somebody that's relatively in good shape, they'll be looking, assuming they're, in a place where their physiology is not completely down-regulated or adapted to terrible dieting approaches in the past, something like that. You could potentially lose anywhere from quarter to a half of a pound of body fat every week or so. And that's not impossible, but that's also not going to be a linear drop, and it's not necessarily going to be um, a guarantee, but it's a pretty realistic approach. So you could possibly lose, 5 pounds of body fat in, 10, 15 weeks. But most people are looking to lose 10, 20 pounds of body fat in 12 weeks. Like they're just looking to have that I can drop a pound a week, a pound a week, a pound a week. And where those numbers come from is people can drop a pound of body weight a week, easy, maybe even more quite easily, but it's not body fat. So what they're usually doing is just losing weight. And then they're attributing that to being fat loss, and it almost certainly is not. Um, I think that what people need to be doing is if your goal and it seemingly is every year for females, especially, but men too. If your goal is to look a certain way by summer, you should already be thinking of that right now for next year, like 2026, not this year, 2025. You should be planning ahead because what you want to do is you want to have a sustainable approach that's bringing progress in whatever direction you want it to be, whether it's muscle gain or fat loss, all the time. I don't think the winter is an excuse to gain a bunch of body fat and then hopes to, get rid of it quickly, aggressively right before summer again. That's a terrible way of almost yo-yo dieting yourself up and down, and it's just not going to be linear. If people want to be in shape for summer, they need to be in decent shape in the winter and be planning way, way ahead. I would sooner see 6 months time frame than I would 6 weeks. And anytime somebody says, "Oh, I can lose that amount of body fat in 12 weeks," I think they're probably looking to at least double that. If you think it's 12, it's probably more like 24, 30. And that's a pretty good ballpark. Usually, when people think they have 12 weeks, it's usually double at least.
It almost sounds like there is a benefit of working towards kind of mental approach, mental improvement. If you talk to somebody and tells them, look, it's unrealistic that within the next 6, 8 weeks you're going to be looking at your best shape. You probably need to diet into summer a bit longer if you wanted to, uh, and then just take care of it a bit more deliberate through the year. So, what kind of strategies would you implement to shift that mindset towards, hey, I'm just going to go really hard in the spring, and then I'm just going to really enjoy myself, how people describe it in the winter? Uh, so, is there anything that you specifically see that works for people to maintain themselves in a better shape throughout the year rather than going up and down, back and forth all the time?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's a few different things factor into this. I think if you're showing clients results, it always seemingly keeps them on track. The trick to that is making sure that the results they're seeing is being, or the results you're looking for is being measured appropriately. Like we've talked about the proper metrics for assessing progress a few times now, and that's the thing that most people seemingly still get wrong. They're not measuring the right thing to determine if they're making progress or not. Um, I don't think you need to live out of Tupperware containers to make progress. And lots of times, what you see is people like when they hear about dieting, they think they go from a normal way of life to chicken and broccoli out of Tupperware. That it's like extremes. It doesn't need to be. I don't think I've put food in Tupperware in fucking 2 decades. Like it's not necessarily the way to do this. So what I find is explaining to people, making people understand this is just about energy balance. It's not about specific foods. It's about specific energy intakes based on them and how they get that energy. That is not as important. Of course, there's niche scenarios where it becomes specific, but in general, a relatively modest approach to this stuff, like the diet book I wrote, like 80% of your calories coming from nutrient dense, calorically poor foods. That's it. 80% of your diet. Bring that from wholesome foods. That's all you have to worry about. And that will yield progress, but you have to know what you're measuring to make sure that you're seeing progress. So when I do that with clients and they understand, they can move foods around. They can supplement this for that or swap this for that. It doesn't matter. As long as the total energy is where it needs to be, they'll make progress. So when we're doing that approaching the winter, typically what I see is winter's coming. I can go to a quote unquote off season. That's what everybody, people use different terms like stupid terms like I'm going to bulk or whatever they're going to do. Um, But typically, especially where I live, the seasons are kind of dictating what people want. Come fall, winter, people are okay with going into a quote unquote off season and gaining some weight. And that's perfectly fine with me. It doesn't matter to me. But gaining weight does not have to mean gaining abnormal amounts of body fat. It just means we're changing your energy balance to prioritize something different, hopefully muscle mass. But again, it's up to the client. So when that's happening, as body weight slowly increases, if we continue to show them that it's not body fat, they still feel good, they're still motivated, and we're still in what I consider to be control of the body composition. And then when we know that summer's coming up in June, all my competitive clients, um, when they're going to compete on stage for the summer, they start their preps, typically their preps right after the new year. And it doesn't matter where in the show or the year the show is, but if it's a summer show or later, we usually start in January. And everyone's like, well, I don't want to fucking do that for 6 months, 7 months. Well, that's because nobody would want to eat chicken and tilapia out of Tupperware for 6, 7 months. But you also don't have to. What you have to do is you have to lose body fat. I can make you lose body fat without eating chicken and tilapia. You can if you want, but you don't have to. So if we give them sustainable strategies that they can constantly do and it's not disrupting their life, they'll still make progress. Now, at this point in the bodybuilding community, you're going to end up having a pretty restricted way of eating towards the end of your prep. There's no way around it anymore because the level of leanness is so extreme. But that's extreme. That's a bikini competitor. That's not most people. In fact, I would say that's hardly even close to the majority. Um, Most people don't need to worry about that. They just need to get into an energy deficit, and that's very easily accomplished. And if they're seeing body fat coming down, they stay motivated and it becomes sustainable. And we can have you enjoying barbecues on the weekend. It's all about strategy. The body is averages over time. So if I need you to eat 15,000 calories a week, I need you to eat 15,000 calories a week. If you decided to eat 14,000 calories on Friday and 1,000 calories on Saturday, and you fasted the other 5 days, you still hit 15,000 calories. At the end of the day, you're still going to maintain that energy deficit. And over time, it's still going to contribute to the progress of fat loss. Um, when you're inconsistent with stuff like that, you will see acute fluctuations, but that's just acute fluctuations. That's not necessarily showing you fat loss or not. So if people understand what's happening, they can measure that progress and understand it. There's just nothing complicated about this. And you can go out and have drinks on the weekends. If girls want to get in shape for the summer so they can go on the beach and then they want to socialize all weekend and they want to be rigid Monday to Friday at work. I mean, that's very, very easily achieved if the strategies are set up properly.
Is there anything that is probably making it easier to get into shape seasonally? That, hey, spring is coming, days are longer, more sun, I can really get myself out, I feel more energized and this and that. Uh, and if there is advantage of different season, can we somehow utilize it in the seasons that majority of people kind of lay themselves uh, off from intense training and looking after themselves more?
Yeah, absolutely. Because of the season change and the weather and everybody's now kind of getting antsy to get outside, oftentimes what we can do is just let them naturally get out. They want to anyway. You don't have to program it in. And you can, again, this is why it's so nice to have a longer timeline so you're not on a pinch. You can let these things sort of develop, organically in a sense. You can just keep your potentially energy intake the way it was. Say you've been eating, assuming you're not gaining excessive amounts of body fat, which we're not because we're monitoring this. Let's say we have a 200 or 300 or 500 calorie a day surplus through the winter and body fat is relatively in check. We're happy with that. We could just not change anything. Just let the seasons turn, let you get outside and start moving more because you will automatically and measure what that gives us because we're not on a timeline. We're not on a big time crunch. We might start getting fat loss without changing anything. But normally people are on off switches. Well, I'm bulking, so I'm going to eat like an asshole. Now I'm quote unquote cutting, so I'm going to starve myself. It's always extremes, ups and downs, ups and downs. But it doesn't need to be that way. As soon as the warm weather breaks, people are going to want to be outside. They're going to want to be, even if they're not active, they're outside, maybe even just standing and socializing, maybe walking, something like that. They're more inclined to do that because of the weather. That already changes the energy balance. And sometimes that changes enough that we don't even need to actually adjust the caloric intake because the change in NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, just the change in that is yielding enough, um, sort of enough of a change that body fat starts dropping. And then from there, we can start to tweak. I'm always looking at my clients' progress weekly and adjusting accordingly. If I see body fat coming down, I don't need to change it. If you give me a timeline where we're stuck on a rigid timeline, like we have 12 weeks look like this way, you're unfortunately going to have to get run through the gauntlet. And that is not where you should voluntarily want to go. As soon as somebody comes to me that has that type of goal, um, I try very hard to discourage it and try to convince them to do something else, or I literally just turn them away. I had a male 2 days ago actually message me for competition. He wants to do a men's what do you call the one, not bodybuilding, the one underneath it, classic, men's classic, and he wants to compete this fall. You'll understand how ridiculous this sounds. He wants to compete this fall, but he wants to put on 20 pounds of muscle first right now before he competes this fall. I'm like, where is that happening in this world? Are you going to gain 20 pounds of muscle first and then diet down to be on stage? Like it's ridiculous. Um, so anytime I see that kind of stuff, I tell them, a different idea. And if they're stuck on it, I just say no. So I told this guy, "Nah, sorry, I can't. I don't have any room for you right now," because it's just even if you succeed, you succeeded at a half-ass job. You know what I mean? Like you can't have done it amazingly well because your setup from the beginning was half-ass. I don't want that. I want people to be able to make quality progress and keep it so it's, not only is it achievable, but it's sustainable. And then from there, we can talk about getting extremes if it's necessary.
To me, that's such a, I don't even know where this has come from, but such flawed thinking that you can gain 20 pounds and then diet them down in same exact year and actually keep any of it.
Yeah, yeah.
It just
And,
doesn't.
and all and all that's going to do is just not only highly encourage, but almost mandatorily determine the fact that he's going to have to run so much drugs. He doesn't stand a chance. Even with that, he's not going to achieve what he's trying to do. But even if he gives it a run for it, he's going to be at like 2, 3 grams a week on somebody that just is not ready for that. Like there's just no point. So
Not
some coach
even
will take him on
that,
and push it.
your body's ability to lay down everything else that's needed before muscle even starts to kind of form.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
It doesn't
I
take
agree. And then
seconds.
yeah, and then half the time. So this is, coming from the quote unquote sport that's probably the most vain of all. So you're telling me that you want to gain 20 pounds of muscle through the summer where you probably want to have your shirt off the whole time and therefore not lose your abs. So where's the 20 pounds coming from? It's not coming from your caloric surplus because you won't do that. And guys are just as bad as women. There's no doubt about it. But with women, it's just seemingly um, more common to have that yo-yo type of thing and it impacts them psychologically a little bit more because they don't ever want to let their physique go. Where men will, and then they'll say they're bulking. They'll put a shirt on, they feel good because they're big. Women don't feel good when they feel like that. So psychologically, it's harder on them. So if you can have them set up in a way that they're always making progress. They're making progress. My clients are making progress every single day of the year. It never changes. What's changing is the goal. And if the goal is understood, then the metrics to measure progress are understood. And then you show them results. And if results are happening, they stay motivated. And we don't have these yo-yo effects. But this whole waiting to the last minute to get ready for summer to me is you're shooting yourself in the foot right from the beginning, and you're just making it harder. And every year when you do the same thing, it's going to get harder and harder and harder, and to the point where you just can't. And then you start to even beat yourself up further because you're failing at the goal.
You kind of touched up on nutrition, like eat whole foods and this and that. What does sound nutrition look like for you, and does it change according to season at all, if at all? I think I'll just throw in my personal opinion that uh, the bigger you are, the more complex it might get. Whereas if you are a 50, 60 kilo bikini chick, it's probably less less problematic to get the nutrition right.
Um, yes and no. It's kind of contextual. The problem with being a 50 or 60 kilo bikini girl is there's so few calories going in anyways because of the physical size of the person that there's not a lot of room for error in terms of quality of the food. Um, if you need 4 or 5 thousand calories, if 2 or 3 of those 1,000 calories are nutrient dense, calorically poor foods, from a micronutrient point of view, that person's relatively well covered. There may be niche scenarios where you have to get specific, like maybe even a specific macro distribution or a specific supplement. But in general, if you have that many calories coming in, it's really difficult to be micronutrient deficient unless you're completely eating like an idiot. Where with a female that can only take in, 1,500, 2,000 calories, they don't have that same room of error or margin of error for, eating more palatable foods or less nutrient dense foods. So that's a bit of a hurdle sometimes. Um, but typically, until we get to a point, and it happens where we have a very niche scenario, I abide by that 80-20 rule. If 80% of your calories are coming from, say, the butcher and produce aisle, you're covering the basics. There's a lot of arguments about, the nutrients in foods based on the soil, et cetera, and that's all, quite possible depending where you live. But at the end of the day, you still need to have something to start with. And that 80-20 rule to me is your baseline. If you're there, almost certainly you're pretty well covered. If not, you are covered. And then from there, we still need to have a baseline measurement. So from there, we then start looking, okay, now if we're seeing a problem, maybe let's look at bloods. Let's see, maybe we do have a deficiency. Um, I'm not the hugest fan of following our quote unquote meal plan all the time because of that exact reason. If you only eat, 3 types of foods all the time, you do run a higher risk of a deficiency in certain micronutrients. But I think that just rotating vegetables and fruits from colors, lean proteins in general across the board, fibrous vegetables, and then things like potatoes, rice. So if you're doing that for the majority of your food, I mean, it's pretty rare you find somebody that has a problem until you get into niche scenarios. And there are certain physiologies that do require a little bit more specifics. But I think you got to kind of come across those once you've got the foundation established. Usually people come and they don't even have the foundation established. They're just eating whatever and they don't have their fiber intake right. They don't have their essential fatty acid intake right. They have things just all over the place. You got to start with a solid foundation first. And so far in, 25 years now of coaching, when I have a solid foundation start with somebody, when we've allowed enough time to make sure that it's taking its effect, it's pretty rare where we have to get really, really fancy. Usually it's some sort of ailment that we have to deal with that comes up. But in general, that's enough to get most people where they want to go with, relatively easily, to be fair.
When you go about trying to get them going in a winter, do you have any like motivational strategies like okay, you've chosen clients, you showed them previous results, but more often than not, like I do know people who literally have to drag people out of bed for them to keep moving. Is there anything that you would suggest for somebody to kind of implement? Like my favorite is specifically with girls. I don't do it with guys, but with girls, I just ask them to have a photo of someone they want to look like as a screensaver. That kicks their ass. What about you? Do you find anything that keeps them focused on a goal through the winter time? If there is somebody who you find that is struggling to get back in that desired shape and always crushing and burning into summer and then falling back into old pattern of letting it go in winter?
That's a good question. I used to have that a lot more, 20 years ago, and I would use things like, you know, take a picture of who you're aspiring to be, something like that, and put it on the fridge, put it on your screenshot of your phone, something that keeps you. But I've long since realized that people aren't going to always be motivated. So we have to teach them strategies that become habits so they can stay disciplined because that is going to keep them going. Nowadays, I typically don't get that many clients that I have to worry about they have to self-motivate. They're usually already, if they're not motivated, they understand what they're in for. What I find works better, and I can't say it works better, it's just now it's more what I'm working with. What I find works very well, I guess I should say, is by the time summer has come to an end, even when we're doing things relatively I don't know, like not aggressively, but relatively linear progress. It's not crazy aggressive. It's not extreme, but still, by the time that summer's ended, they're ready for a change, anyways. And so they're usually looking forward to increasing their calories and changing things up. Oftentimes, the training protocols kind of coincide with where we are seasonally. It's not because they need to be, it's just the way timelines work out. 12, 16 weeks usually is a good time. You need to be starting to change, maybe even overhauling protocols. So by the time this fall, winter breaks, people are ready for a change. And so that's what we do. We implement the change. But then when we're changing that, it's usually because the goal is changing. So we're going from a fat loss goal to a muscle building goal. So now what has to happen is the way we're measuring progress has to change. And I think that's where most people are still dropping the ball. They're looking at the same things all the time to determine if they're making progress, and it seemingly is always the fucking scale. They're always using the body weight scale to determine progress, whether they're gaining muscle or losing fat. They use a scale. Well, I can make you gain weight and it's not muscle. I can make you lose weight and it's not fat. And if you're using a scale, you won't know. So when we switch to the fall or winter blocks, which is very common if it's a seasonal type of training system, which a lot of women like. Once we're going into that lean accrual tissue sort of phase, we just change how we're measuring it. And then once we're showing that progress is being made, it's the progress that always keeps people going. I don't want to say keeps them motivated, but it keeps them going. And I don't usually have to worry too much about people being motivated. And I've gotten to the point now that the athletes or clients I'm working with, if they're just not wanting or able to do this, they just don't. And I don't force them. They kind of just disappear. But for the last probably decade or so, I'm not really having motivational issues with clients. They understand what has to happen. But I do think that the strategies that they learn and a way to measure progress, it takes motivation away and they just stay disciplined.
What would you do if somebody comes and you really want to help them out, like you say, the motivation dissipates and whatnot. Is there any kind of like a strategy apart from using those visual cues that you say would be helpful to develop in future, even if you know that they're gonna fall off, but you would say like, hey, you know what? Maybe do this around your Christmas time, around your Thanksgiving, and so on and so forth. Is there something that you would be able to suggest for them to not end up in a bad starting position?
Yeah, I would give them little sort of like stepping stone goals to achieve, but it would depend entirely on where they're starting from. I had a female, an incredibly obese female. For I worked with her for almost 2 years. It's she wasn't an athlete by any means. She was very, very, very overweight. And she'd just been railroaded multiple times. So I spent a year and a half, maybe even more, closer to 2 years with her. And our progress markers were physical things. Like she owned a bakery. Um, and so just changing the water jug. out of the water cooler. In the beginning, she couldn't do that. She had to have somebody help her change the water cooler. So after some strength training, she sent a video one time. I'll never forget. She sent a video and she's overhead pressing the fucking water. Like she felt amazing. We weren't focusing really on quote unquote weight loss. It was happening organically because she was improving her strength. So it sort of depends on the person. I mean, I, I want to help anybody that comes to me for coaching, but I'm also realistic with, where I can help and where I can't. And if I see an opportunity that yes, I can, I will of course try. But what they need, it would be contextual for sure. I find typically females in general just need to get a little stronger. And as soon as you prioritize that's almost game changing. It doesn't influence their body weight almost at all. In fact, usually their body weight, if it doesn't stall, it might even blip up a little bit, but they start noticing the benefits of the strength, and that just seemingly starts to kind of cascade down, and they start feeling almost inspired or motivated to keep going. And then before long, they start getting leaner. They notice it in their clothing. Even though it's still not being measured on a scale, their clothing is fitting differently. And then they're starting to um, almost get intrigued, like what's going on? What's going on? This is with people that, aren't athletes per se. And then once you have that happening and they're starting to see progress, that becomes quite motivational to them. And I think that is sort of the key. The key from my experience has been if you show them results, they're good. They're not usually getting derailed unless something happens. Things can happen. But in general, if they're getting results, they're usually pretty okay with continuing with the progress.
Yeah, my personal favorite is convincing them to join a gym that is full with jacked people.
That's your go-to.
Yeah, because most of the people I work with, they have home gyms, and I'm like, that's the reason why you're not in shape, because
Yeah,
you're only
right.
compare yourself to yourself, and unless you see what's actually physically possible, you don't understand how much work goes into it. And more often than not, I've had people, I have girls specifically showing me, I want to look like this, and they show me like Miss Olympia winner. Oh, can I get ready for this in summer? I'm like, no, you cannot get ready like that ever. Like
Yeah.
ever. It's never gonna happen because you don't understand how much work is gone into that. Because they
Yeah.
see the
Yeah.
photo and they think that's achievable doing what you do at home. It's not. It's just not. Unless you see Bum, who has a full setup in a gym and who has trained all his life extremely hard, and now he can maintain that at home gym, you're not going to get there. Yeah, you need to be
Right.
realistic about that. But any other things that you think would be useful? Maybe there are some kind of supplements that are seasonal or something like that that you see benefit introducing. People love vitamin D. People do these NAD and NMN and all that kind of weird stuff. People do all kind of weird stuff without understanding what it does. Is there
Yes, they do.
something that actually works that you think is useful uh, to help you to stay on track? Maybe a pre-workout, maybe a post-workout, maybe whatever. Gives a little edge in the training to keep you motivated and coming back. So because you train really hard, or something that helps you recover better, sleep better, something, anything at all that's seasonal.
Um, Typically, once summer's approaching, I actually think that's the time where most people need less supplementation because they're outside now. They do get exposure to the sun, so the odds of them needing to supplement vitamin D in the summer is probably a little less. But again, you could have a job that doesn't let you outside, so seasonal doesn't necessarily for sure change supplementation protocols. It could, um, but I always have been and probably always will be a fan of using the least amount of everything possible to get the result. So just because it's going into spring, I'm not saying, okay, it's sunny outside, so now you take this, and you get rid of this, and this. I don't believe it works that way. I think it depends on how you're eating, how much you're eating, what does your blood work say? What do we need? What's the goal? What's legal in your country? What's not? Like, there's a lot of things that have to get factored in. Um,
And we have
you
some
know, are you,
about specifically about fat loss. So if people interested, they just need to go on earlier in this series and check up on caffeine,
yeah,
green, GH, and all that kind of good stuff.
yeah, and I'm sure there'll be more videos like that. But yeah, we've done a couple of supplementation videos. Supplementation, to me, supplementations or supplements are to supplementate something missing in the diet. So as you're getting leaner in the summer, you're going to be in an energy deficit. You may start running the risk of micronutrient deficiencies because caloric intake is less. If that's the case, you may need to start supplementing. It's not because it's summer, it's because your calorie intake is less. From there, though, it depends. Some people live in the summer climate all year round, so there's not really a seasonal change essentially. So they don't really need to change what they're doing, but it's usually an energy intake based thing, and then how you're allocating those micro or those calories to macronutrients. Sometimes that needs to be adjusted.
I'll just try to wrap it up quickly because I know you're I'm mindful of your time. You need to run. And would it be useful if somebody who was watching this would take away the message that there is likelihood that you're not going to get in the shape that you are intending to get this year? So be mindful of that and don't try to sabotage yourself because it didn't happen. And be open-minded to work towards maintaining whatever results you're achieving this summer throughout the winter, so next year is easier.
100%. I think people should always try to give themselves as much time as possible. It doesn't happen in 12 weeks like you think.
Awesome, Scott. Appreciate your time, and I'll see you in our
Yeah, no
next video.
problem. Sounds good. Thank you.